Aligning expectations for older adults and their families is critical for assisted living facilities in order to avoid and reduce the risk of litigation. Join me for this episode with Rebecca Adelman, where she shares the work that she's been doing in this area and a certification program for senior living communities called GuidePath. Welcome to This is Getting Old, Moving Towards an Age-Friendly World. I'm your host, Dr. Melissa Batchelor, and I am a nurse and a nurse practitioner, and I've been caring for older adults and their families for over 25 years. Before we dive into today's topic, I just wanted to share a few of the different ways that you can connect with me. First, you can subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already done so, and you can do that from whatever platform you're listening from today. And if you like the episode, please leave a comment or share it with someone that it might be beneficial for. And you can also go to my website, melissabphd.com, and sign up to be part of my newsletter to get the latest news and information about the courses I'm developing, as well as the AgeWiseU membership site, where all of my podcasts will be organized for you by topic, rather than having to scroll through a gazillion thumbnails to find another podcast I've done that might be related to this one. And you can also join me on the Facebook group for the podcast called that's known by the podcast name. So This is Getting Old, Moving Towards an Age-Friendly World in Facebook, and I will see you there. Now let's dive into this week's episode. So welcome to this week's episode, where I'm joined by Rebecca Adelman, and we're going to be talking about what to expect when moving into assisted living. So welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you so much for having me, Melissa. It is just lovely to be here, and thanks for all you do for this whole ecosystem. So thanks so much.
Yep. So before we get started, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and how you ended up kind of in the assisted living space.
Yeah, you bet. So I'm home based here in Memphis, Tennessee. You're actually on this podcast. We are in my law firm. So I have a law firm down here where I have for, north of 35 years, focused on providing legal services, advisory, risk management services, and solutions in the assisted living space. So I started out many, many years ago in senior living, defending lawsuits, early on in my legal practice. And from there, sort of built sort of a larger body of work around risk management, around expectations management, which I know we're going to be talking about today. So yeah, that's how I found my way there professionally. And then personally, and I think in this space, everyone has a personal story. I had a father who, of blessed memory, had Alzheimer's, and I was his caregiver for many, many years, and was with him on that journey through assisted living. And I currently have my mother's and also in assisted living. So it's professional, and then it's very personal to me. So that's how I found myself here.
So welcome, Rebecca. So maybe as we get started, let us know what kind of the GuidePath resources in this white paper, and kind of talk about that body of work and what's available to assisted living facilities.
Yeah, I appreciate that opportunity to do. So GuidePath itself is a sort of a culture change initiative that includes, and you'll see it once you have access to the white paper, it includes a resident and family insight survey that is delivered to the residents from the communities and their families, that includes these 25 very, very important questions about the 5 domains that we're going to be discussing here today, where really expectations lie, and where we need to set and manage and understand feelings and needs around these 5 areas. So there's the survey side of it, which is one of the pathways. And the white paper is really the information we gathered from the pilot. And then we have for the communities pathway, we have a certification program, which is GuidePath's 9. It's got 9 modules from areas like goals of care, the aging process, palliative care, risk management, expectations management, diversity, equity, belonging, inclusion and belonging. So we have 9 modules that once you complete those modules, the community itself becomes GuidePath certified. So the GuidePath resources sort of go hand in hand. We've got the survey, we've got the curriculum. We've just concluded the curriculum pilot in January. We've certified 7 communities. The feedback from the certification, not just from the empowerment of our staff to have the kind of learning that they need in order to, address these feelings and needs, not just for residents and families, but for also themselves being in this caregiving ecosystem. The feedback's been amazing, and it's also been a big differentiator for the communities to differentiate themselves in the marketplace from other communities. Guide Path means something. It's a commitment to an engagement with residents and families and with their own staff empowerment that's so critically important. So that kind of is the framework for what we're going to be discussing during our exchange today.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about, because I have a lot of thoughts about this space as well, but let's talk a little bit, we'll start off talking about the evolution of kind of older adults and the role of family and the role of assisted living as, when someone requires that level of care or they can't live independently.
Yeah. And, I think even maybe walking it back just a little bit, I think we've really seen in the past 10 years, 15 years, we've really seen a change in in our consumer in assisted living. Let's just say that. The level of knowledge, accessibility of information, expectations, as it relates to the people that we serve in assisted living who become members, who come and live with us and we become their home. I think we've seen really sort of a changing landscape there as well in terms of sometimes more chronic conditions, more complexities in assisted living than we've seen, let's say, in the past 20 years. So I think that whole landscape has really changed, which then changes, the sort of everyone's framework when they are deciding to transition to assisted living, when they're coming to assisted living and transitioning with their families and, to an assisted living landscape. So I think there's really a change in our consumers, so to speak, and the people that we are serving. And then, I think that's what shapes sort of the expectations and the understanding of what might happen in the transitions of care. I think that's what I think is the foundation of it all, is sort of the changing landscape around not just the assisted living and how it's changed in the services it offers, but also our consumer and what's expected.
Right. So the way I think of this is like, we have skilled nursing homes, which everyone is familiar with and nobody wants to go there. But basically, in order to be a resident in a skilled nursing home, you have to require a skill that a licensed nurse needs to deliver for you. That's the resident profile. The skilled nursing facilities in the United States are regulated by the federal government, and you do receive licensed nursing care. And then there was this gap between people living at home, but needing more support in more of a social model. And this is really where the assisted living industry kind of came in. And right now, the skilled nursing homes of America are basically the hospitals of 30, 40 years ago. And assisted livings are now becoming the nursing homes, what they were before they were regulated federally. So our assisted living communities are regulated by individual state regulations and company policies and procedures, and they market themselves to provide nursing care. So a consumer thinks, oh, I'm going to have licensed nursing care provided, and I will put mom or dad in the assisted living facility because they always told me they never wanted to go to the nursing home. So we're going to keep them in assisted living. And since it's private pay, assisted living facilities are like, no problem. Only $50 more. You can't take care of yourself. You need a walker. We will get you a walker. We can get PT in here. And so they've continued to kind of elevate the amount of services provided, of course, charging the consumer for all of that. And people are staying in assisted living probably longer than they should be. They need to transition to skilled care, but the assisted living facilities will hold on to them for as long as possible. So I think the thing to me is like one of the expectations I think that families have is that they will get nursing care, but they don't really understand that that's really going to be provided by nursing assistants, med techs, LPNs, and there's actually not a registered nurse in that building most of the time. So, maybe.
Yeah, you bring up you bring up a whole host of, we could, the umbrella around that part of the conversation is really about aging in place. I think that's the conversation, is aging in place. And where assisted living used to resemble kind of a retirement, like we don't want to take care of our home anymore. We don't want to have to take care of the yard anymore. We want to go and have like services where we can be more social with people who are our age. Let's go to an assisted living community. That really was the model. And I think we're seeing sort of I think we're seeing a movement to kind of expand what that assisted living looks like. But to your point,
that expectation now are those people really want to be an independent living.
Everything shifted 100%. And I think at the assisted living site, what we've seen, again, because of the complexities we're seeing in residents who were caring for multiple medication needs, multiple care needs, that, when the expectation of going to assisted living is, I think you're right, is that they are going to assist not only with activities of daily living, assisting with, it could be, showering and bathing and supportive food and bringing in rehabilitation and extra support for activities of daily living. But there is a clinical component to it. And I think that is one of the expectations, is that there is a clinical component. And I think, most state regulations, to your point, Melissa, and you oversighted that beautifully, by the way. That's exactly what it is. I mean, there are certain regulatory frameworks around this that are critically important when it comes to financing, when it comes to all sorts of other dynamics in the industry. But from the assisted living, perspective, the state regulations do require there be some clinical oversight, clinical staff involved in the model. Okay. Not nearly as much, nor as, I don't even want to bring up staffing requirements, clinical staffing requirements.
But that's such a hot topic.
That's a Pandora's box. But on the skilled side, there's a lot of conversation around that, of course, and the more clinical model and skilled. So I think when we're talking about expectations in the assisted living, we leave out a very important partner, which is either the treating physician, the physician. When families are at home and they're caring for their loved one, or their loved one is caring for them, and they need a transition to a higher level of care or more support for their activities of daily living, there is a physician involved somewhere. Okay,
or provider.
Yeah, or provider. That's true. There's nurse practitioners. There's a medical component to it. Let's just say that their medications have to be ordered. Their medications have to be managed. And most of those services are coming from either their primary care physician, or they're coming from a home health agency that then comes to the community to provide clinical services. Or in many instances, folks who are living, with us, go out to their families will take them out to their doctors, and but there is a clinical component. And I think you're right that there is a misunderstanding that the clinical issues that families are dealing with, that typically are the drivers to go to assisted living, is one of the things I was thinking about in anticipation of our meeting today was, again, like these transitions in care, right? So we've got typically what will happen, which is what really defines the expectations or sets the expectations, is we've got this person we care about that we love. Maybe we're caring for them they're in our own home, or maybe they're in their home and we're providing support care. Maybe they have people coming into their home to help support, but that model isn't working anymore. And typically the transition is going to happen either by a decision that's made because their support group, typically the family, can't care for them anymore, which could be, a higher level of need or other responsibilities that the family has, which I do want to talk about here in a moment, because that's a whole set of expectations we oftentimes overlook in these transitions of care, is what's going on actually in the family dynamics and their support team. Yeah. Or there's an acute event. Somebody falls, somebody has an event, someone has a stroke, something happens that moves them into an acute care setting first for a transition and then to assisted living. And all those little transitions in there, all those important transitions are what, there are expectations all along the way.
Yeah.
And
or there's like no expectations. Some people are just completely overwhelmed because
Yeah.
one of the things that you're talking about, with a skilled nursing home, they're based on the medical model. So all that clinical stuff is there. And assisted living was developed around a social model. Just like you said earlier, people went there for, to not have so many responsibilities and to increase the social aspect of, that when you live at home alone, you don't have. And, and you're right to be, when someone has an acute, you either plan ahead or you have to respond to an acute event, like you said. And people will say, well, what's going to happen? And this is where case managers come in, because it does matter, how physically fit you are. It matters, how many chronic conditions you have. And then the big thing is, how much money do you have? Because first question is like, well, what type of financial situation are you in? Because it's going to cost money. In fact, you could actually live on a cruise ship for a year for less than you can live in assisted living.
Wow. That's a whole other conversation to have.
So let's get back to talking about family expectations and kind of your role in helping assisted living facilities.
Yeah.
Kind of how can we help families if you end up assisted living? What should the expectations be? And then, then we can talk a little bit about the risks that might be involved and how assisted livings can help families and their residents reduce the risks of mismatched expectations.
Yeah, no, that's a great, your segues are spot on. So in terms of sort of where I show up in the space and my teams of people, what I've learned over the course of time as a lawyer. So like if we're looking at a risk spectrum, right? So as a lawyer who's defending assisted living, there's an event that happens, it escalates, somebody goes and hires a lawyer, and then I come in. So like on the risk spectrum, right? Like that's gone. Like we're at the 9s, the 10s, the 8s, the 9s, and the 10s when I show up as a defense lawyer. Right. But if we move down that risk spectrum, we really have opportunities, which is what we're talking about today. We have opportunities at the 0, right? We have opportunities to educate residents and their families about what to expect. So I think honestly, it really all begins with a common understanding of what kind of basic information the resident and the family actually have about what's going on in their own family system. So, I've identified sort of 5 key areas where there historically has been either lack of understanding on the assisted living side or lack of understanding on the resident and the family side about certain expectations that relate to communication, that relate to the family system itself, the goals of care, which could be, advanced directives, very important part of this conversation, advanced directives, end of life care, palliative care, and any component of quality of life, the aging process, and then emotional and spiritual health. Those are really the 5 key areas where most either expectations are set or there is total lack of understanding between the family, the resident, and the assisted living. And I think that, before we go into trying to set and manage resident and family's expectations, we really need to understand what's their baseline. What do they already think?
Okay, so that's a great outline. And I think that those 5 steps that you're talking about are part of a white paper that you participated in writing in. And we're going to give everybody the link to that. But let's first talk through like communication. So what are some of the communication issues that happen with assisted living and kind of mismatched expectations?
Yeah, so like in the area of the domain of communication, we have certain ways we've communicated with our family and the people that we're caring for at home. Maybe we talk to our mom every day or our dad every day or the person we're caring for every day. Maybe we're engaged with them every day. Maybe we're not. Maybe there's a family member who lives, far away, who is on the phone with their loved one once a week. There are all sorts of already existing communication dynamics going on. And when we get to the assisted living community, they obviously can't be the same. They can't. We can't be calling everyone every day to update. We have tools and resources, and there's all sorts of nice technology innovations of how to stay very, very engaged. But those ways that we communicated or engaged with our family obviously are going to change. And so understanding from the family's perspective, sort of what their expectations already are, or what their baseline is, so to speak, and then what they can expect, and learn. Do you want to get your information in a text message? Do you want to get your information in an email? Do you want us to call you? What's your expectation of how often you're going to hear from us, so that we can tell them, well, we're also caring for, this is the home for a lot of other people, right? That also have, that we're engaged with. So the communication may not be as frequent as you need, but we want to invite you in anytime you want. That's really part of the overarching, what I have found, the overarching gift that we can give to residents, and particularly their families, is to remind them that we want them to be their care partners. Just because their loved one is coming to assisted living doesn't mean they can't stay as engaged and partner with us to care for their loved one. And I think that's a misunderstanding that happens, a communication issue that's very important.
Yeah. And so I will say, from my clinical practice in skilled nursing care, and when I became a nurse practitioner then in assisted living, you could go into a building and the staff would be in a tizzy about some family member who's acting badly. And I'm I interpret bad behavior as there's an unmet need. And so I would say, has anybody talked to the family? And they're like, well, no. And I'm like, okay. So I would just pick up the phone and call the family, and they would tell me what their issue was. I'm like, that's totally, we can totally fix that. And just calm the drama down. And I'm like, if you would just communicate with people. I will say that my number one strength in Strength Finders is communication. So maybe it's built into my person.
There you go. And understanding that in advance, that, knowing, in advance that, that people, what you're pointing out actually is sort of on the continuum, is educating our staff about this. It's not just a one-way street. Like, what do we need to know about the residents and the families? It's how do we need to educate our teams, right? To do the due diligence, to find out what the feelings and the needs are, because we all have them. And one of the, when I'm working with our communities on these very important issues on expectations management, one of the key pieces of all of this is just, at the heart of it all, what really drives losses, what drives claims, what drives losses, what drives complaints, what drives calling the state, all of that is really just needs and feelings. It's feelings of guilt, feelings of confusion, feelings of sadness, feelings of, being disrespected, whatever it is.
And lack of trust too.
And that's the heart of it, is trust. So if we can start to cultivate that early, we're already winning, I think.
All right. So the next domain that you mentioned was the family system. And I mentioned earlier, feelings of guilt and, maybe regret and kind of what was going on with that family dynamic. But if you've been providing care to your mom or your dad for a really long time, and they've lived in your home, putting them in assisted living or into institutional care, your role as a caregiver it shifts and it changes.
100%.
And so there's also loss and grief and
absolutely,
and a lot of uncertainty. So let's talk a little bit about how the family system impacts expectations and risk.
You bet. And when we talk about the family system, also be considering that the family system includes the support system. So understanding sort of the larger family system, it could be clergy, it could be friends, it could be we use family system because it's, it's understood, but most instances you've got sort of a primary caregiver. You've got one family member or two family members who have been responsible along this aging process to be caring for their loved one. That's really what we see most often. But then you also see like dynamics, which is, there might be the other, child who isn't involved in the care, but has something to say. You might have the.
Okay, I have a term for all these things. You could put together the best care plan ever. We would call them the Seagull Daughter. We would have never heard from her. And we have worked tirelessly with this family, and she just swoops in and poops all over everything. And you're like, that's a Seagull Daughter,
Well, but
and then you also,
oh my goodness, I've never heard that before. I'm loving that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then you would always know, like a first time placement for a family, for a resident, was always the most difficult transition, because if you had been in and out of the system, those expectations for the families were different, because they were like, okay, well, this facility's pretty much the same as this facility,
Right.
But
well, that's you bring up all the important points.
And then you have the Jerry Springer families, and then you have the nice healthy
ones. You got them all. The best thing that we can do in our survey, this survey that I've got that that really is the subject of the white paper. But the survey, the Resident and Family Insight Survey, asks all those questions. We find out if there's a Seagull daughter. Yeah. We find out if it's the Jerry Springer family. We do that in advance through very discrete questions that help us look under the hood and see what's going on in the family system. And once we know that, we have a point of communication. Oh, I see here that, you've got a sister who doesn't visit very often or who's not very involved in the family. Tell me more about her. Maybe we should get her on the phone and we should talk to her and include her so she doesn't swoop in unknown later on and, decide to make a mess of everything. So knowing those in advance and training our teams and having the tools and resources so we can understand, and maybe there is all of these are intersected, obviously, but maybe there's a close family member who are really like care partners. It could be a cousin who's been taking care of or a grandchild. Yeah. Their family, just, they're part of that family system. So when the transition happens, we're not just providing support to the resident to adapt to their new home, but we're really providing all the resources to the families to allow them to adapt to changes, to loneliness, to deal with all the emotions, to what am I going to do all day, or I'm worried, or, knowing all of that is on the front end at the 0 keeps it from turning into a 9, because that Jerry Springer family ultimately is the family that hires the lawyer. So that. I know that.
I do. And then the other thing that I thought about is that, we've studied relocation stress in residents, but it actually is relocation stress for the entire family. And
transfer trauma is a real thing.
And there's a transition period. And I think that's part of the education and to let families know that those are normal feelings that they're having. And so I think there is a lot of counseling and education that I know I did a lot of it as a provider, trying to help alleviate the guilt, because we would have, if someone has a little bit of Alzheimer's disease, they're going to be like, take me home, I want to go home, and then the family has to leave. And I remember actually talking to these two sisters about their mom, because they were like, it just kills me, like every time I get ready to leave, like she's great when I'm here, she's happy to see me when I come in, but when every time I leave, like she's just like, I want to go home, take me with you. And, I said to them, I said, you know what? I know that is like soul crushing. 5 minutes after you leave, she settles down and she's right back to who she was. And so I equate this to the exact same feeling I have as a mom when I drop my kid off at daycare. They scream, they don't want me to leave them, just initially. After a couple of times, they're like, see you later. So I had to walk away from that. And the daycare teachers told me within 5 minutes, they were busy playing and they had their friends and they were doing great. And so I think even that type of communication to help people emotionally.
100%. Absolutely. And Part of this white paper, we use these family videos. So I've created this series for each of these 5 areas we're talking about today. We've got like a very short video that starts to discuss that. Like it's a resource that the communities can provide to families to say, let me learn more about communication or the family system, or what is it I'm going to expect? So it's not just us, talking to them, and it's them having their own set of resources to start to engender and plant the seeds of trust early on. And to your point, Melissa, the families that have had multiple experiences with assisted living and transitioning through different, care sites, sometimes are the most challenging because, or need the most support because there's a lot of comparison. There's there's usually the survey we've created speaks to, have you had a negative experience before? And I have interviewed family members who've completed the survey, and they say to us, yeah, we were at another care home and like, we didn't like it. We thought that having that information that there's been a negative experience somewhere, how valuable is that allows us like to get ahead of preconceived ideas about what the care is going to be like in our community. So yeah, I mean, super great points, Melissa, very important points.
So now let's move on to the third domain, which is goals of care. And this is a big one.
Yeah, this is the goals of care is probably, to me, the most critical when it comes to needs and feelings, lack of education, not just from the resident and family side, but also from our community side. When we talk about goals of care, or at least what I talk about when we're discussing goals of care, is advanced care planning, end of life care planning, desires and wishes for how our lives are going to unfold as we continue to age, particularly if we're going to age in place at our assisted living communities. What kinds of conversations have families had? What kinds of documents are there in place, right? Is there a advanced care plan? Is there a advanced directive? Is there a will? Is there a power of attorney? Most of these folks don't really, they think they know, like, I'm the power of attorney. I can't even tell you how many depositions I've taken and taken cases to very, very far into litigation. And the family members thought the whole time they had powers of attorney. And then I'm like, well, where is it? And they're like, well, we were it. I'm like, well, you might have been a responsible party, but that doesn't turn you into a legal power of attorney who can make financial and care decisions. We get to end of life at least once every other month. I get a phone call from one of our assisted living communities. We don't have an advanced directive. We don't know what to do here. And we don't even know who the family member is who's supposed to be making the decisions, which is a real issue on our community side, on our assisted living side, on the operations side. Like, we have to assure ourselves also that we are dealing with legally, financially, end of life care planning with the proper legal authorized folks. So all of this, and then, when we're talking about resident directed living, what are your loved ones' wishes? Do you even know?
Yeah.
Do you know what they want?
Yeah. Well, it's called, so What Matters is part of the Age Friendly Health Systems Initiative. And so that's like the first M of the 4 M's, what matters. And then I think the other thing is that I think people think, well, they have a will, they think that, having an advanced directive, like, we're good. And it's like, no, an advanced directive is really like a do not resuscitate order, or do not intubate order. There's a lot more conversation that needs to happen. And there's a document called the 5 Wishes, because it's not really it's kind of like when you have a baby, everybody has a different birth story. Well, everyone has a different end of life story too. And, you have birth planners, wedding planners, and I used to tell everybody I was basically a death planner for older adults and families going through hospice and palliative care. And you might not think it's important, but having a good death planner is really important. And you need to understand the principles behind what the person wants at end of life, because you don't know what the situation's going to be. But you need to know, like, in general, would they want a feeding tube placed, which is, I think, really the only thing that's asked on like a legal, like living will type document. So having other conversations about what are the 5 wishes? Do you want to be comfortable? Would it be more comfortable for you? Would it be more important for you to be comfortable or alert? You know, how do you want pain managed? You know, so there are a lot of different, and there are a lot of resources out there to help you have these conversations. The problem is a lot of people don't want to have them until it's too late. And so, I mean, I've had a lot of conversations with families to say, like, what would your goal be? Like, if you're not making the decision for them, but based on what you know about them, you have to tell me what you think they would want. Because
That's what goals of care. That's where, and we, most of the time, we don't even have those conversations until there's some kind of an event that goes on in our community. I mean, we have the basic legal conversations, you know, we need someone to sign the paperwork and be financially responsible. And we generally understand when we do an assessment or we have some kind of a social working document about a history and what they like and all those kinds of things. But the real sort of below the surface, when it really gets into the feelings and needs in the heart about our loved one and about what we know about our loved one, that's a really important part, because, you know, once our loved one has passed on, where there's all sorts of, there's still people living, you know, and
that's why having a good death planner is important. That same sister group I was talking about, I saw one of those daughters like 3 years later, and she goes, I cannot tell you how much we appreciate the fact that you were there to help guide us through that. And I thought, you know what, that makes it all worth it. You know,
it does. It does.
It's extremely hard.
It does.
The other thing too is, like, my program of research is around hand feeding older adults with Alzheimer's disease until death, because you know, it's hand feeding over tube feeding. But when someone begins to lose weight and they're not eating because of Alzheimer's disease, sometimes people will say, well, all that's left to do now is put in a feeding tube. And so then you begin to have that conversation with families to say, well, what would your goal be in putting in a feeding tube? And it was always like, well, they would get better and you know, they wouldn't starve to death or die of dehydration. It's like, well, you know, not eating is part of this disease process, and those things actually aren't going to happen. It's not going to decrease their risk of aspiration. It's not going to decrease their risk of getting a pressure ulcer. In fact, it could make them more uncomfortable and, you know, and prolong this opportunity for a natural death from a terminal illness. I mean, that's what Alzheimer's disease is. And so there was their goal, but their method of kind of achieving the goal was a little bit misguided by thinking that putting a feeding tube in someone with a terminal illness was going to be the solution. So that's where the education comes into play too, to say, well, the goals of them becoming better aren't going to happen. In fact, it could actually make things worse. And so supportive hand feeding is what we do with this disease until death. And most times families would say, yeah, well, she always said she never wanted a feeding tube.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So, but that does take time, and people, you know, taking 30 minutes to have that type of conversation with a family isn't typically reimbursed. And so then.
Right. Well, that's a whole, that's a whole other type of conversation too, is, you know, and I think to your point, all of these are just such critically important points in feelings, needs, understanding expectations, setting expectations, and then managing them. It's not just having that conversation. It's when to have the conversation, and then to get the feedback, and then continuing to have the conversation and managing those expectations along the way. And I think that's where educating our teams is important, is educating and understanding residents and families. Is it works as it really is this symbiotic relationship. If our folks don't know on our teams, don't really understand the sets of conditions that are presenting themselves, to know, oh my goodness, now's the time to call the doctor to have that conversation, or the doctor needs to come in. I always advocate for, some of the kind of the risk solutions, not jumping ahead, but some of the risk solutions are to have a really nice family night at your assisted living and inviting families and having a physician come, and not necessarily having a conversation around feeding tubes, but having a conversation around goals of care and to be thinking about these things. These kinds of conversations are seed planters. You just have to plant the seeds along the way, because we live in a culture here in the West where, talking about death and dying is like, we don't want to talk about that. We want to live forever. And, we don't want our loved ones to leave us, or if we do, we really don't want to know how it's going to happen. And so starting to create a culture in our communities where that conversation is really not just about quality of living, but it's quality of dying and the rights of our loved ones to die with, great death. That's really been my goal in the work that I do, is how can we make sure everyone dies really well, and that means a lot of things to different people, but.
Right. And so that's a perfect segue into the aging process.
Yes.
The two things we cannot avoid are death and taxes.
Death and taxes. Change is inevitable.
Yeah.
Death
So,
and taxes.
so if you have a choice about the quality of your death, in my mind, that's a conversation to be had. And a lot of times people might not initiate the conversation, but once you get them talking about it, they actually do have quite
a lot to say.
Yeah, a lot to say about it. But let's talk about this domain of the aging process. And let's preface this by saying normal aging does not include decline.
Right.
There are a lot of older adults, who have chronic illnesses where decline is going to be part of that.
Yeah.
So.
And I think that when we're talking about assisted living, something's going on. There's something from a physical, clinical, emotional, behavioral. Some condition is creating these sets of circumstances where we have to make these choices about increased needs for our loved ones. And I think that, this domain of the aging process has been the most surprising to me in some ways, when it comes to, feelings, needs, but really understandings of residents and their families, and then our teams. The aging process, most people, if you ask them the question, what kind of conditions does your loved one have, right? So we just sit down and, like, my dad, I knew, obviously I have a bit of an advantage, but I knew the kinds of conditions my dad was suffering from. I knew the medications he was taking. I knew why he was taking the medications. I knew his medical history. I knew he'd had, a quadruple bypass back in the, X years. I knew about his lifestyle and everything, but most people don't. And so what happens is, I have, again, most of my learning comes from talking to and deposing under oath families and literally asking them the question, what kind of information did you have about your loved one before they came into our assisted living?
Yeah.
Well, she was great. My mom was great. She just needed a little extra support. Well, did you know she had COPD? Did you know she had,
Actually, I would like to vote to rename this domain.
Yeah.
As the aging process, and what you're actually talking about is the impact of chronic disease on the aging process, because the assumption there is, like, the aging process would imply normal, because it's actually a little ageist way to have this stated, because ageism is when we think that aging equals decline and disability.
Mm-hmm.
What you're actually talking about is the impact of chronic illness and chronic comorbid conditions on the aging process.
That's really insightful, Melissa. That's really insightful. It's a great opportunity for us to reframe that conversation. If you look at sort of the research we've done or the white paper and the way it shows up, it really shows up as just, what do you know about your loved one's condition, period.
And so it's about chronic illness.
Right. What about chronic illness? Or it may not be, or just, their lifestyle preferences that impact their health. Could be that, could be anyway, it could be a multitude of different conditions, but the point being, I guess, in this conversation is most people don't really understand where their loved one is in the continuum of any aging process, whether it's like super healthy aging and their loved one's going to live forever, or their loved one has multiple chronic medical conditions and that impacts them during the aging process and their, moving toward their end of life process. And I think people want to believe that their loved one is probably in a significantly better condition than they are.
Right. Well, I mean, I can remember as a nurse practitioner doing admission orders, and you've got the medication list and you're making, you're doing your medication reconciliation. It was like, okay, here's this illness and here's the medication for that. And you get it all mapped out and you've got 20 chronic conditions and 40 medications. And then I would walk in and look at the person. I was like, oh my, and I literally would say this to people. I was like, you look so much better than your paperwork. Like,
Right.
I can't believe what great shape you're in compared to what I just read. Like, because people are living with all of these things going on.
Right.
Yeah, and families aren't aware. I mean, because we don't really talk about, it's not like you walk into the room and say, like, yes, well, I have hypothyroidism, high blood pressure, high cholesterol,
Hypertension.
it's like, and you don't know that unless you've helped somebody manage their medication. So I think there's a lot of health literacy issues here. There's a lot of lack of knowledge around normal aging and abnormal aging and the impact of chronic disease on all of that. And that's really just because it's not in, people, if you just go to high school and after it, I mean, you would have to seek out that education because it's not like you did it in primary education. Secondary education, we're not even better than that because we don't have courses related that where undergraduate and graduate students are required to take a course on aging.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so this perpetuates this ageism and ageist beliefs. And then we also have our own self-perceptions, or self-inflicted ageist beliefs that, oh, well, my right knee hurts because I'm 80. And it's like, well, your left knee's 82. So why doesn't your left knee hurt?
Right. That's a great point. And I'm going to tap you as an incredible resource for the work that we're doing, because this is very illuminating. And I think it drives back to the point of, I don't want to leave out the fact that one of the limitations is really the information that folks get from their healthcare providers, though.
Yeah.
And, a lot of times, I would accompany my dad to his doctor's appointments, and the doctors really, or their healthcare providers, whoever we were seeing who was caring for my dad, really just didn't give us much information at all. It was a lot of, well, you seem to be doing good. You're better, you're okay, or whatever. There was really, and again, there's a whole other conversation about the time that our healthcare providers spend with us, the knowledge. Can we even have enough information to know to ask the right questions? But most folks who come to assisted living, their family members are at somewhere along the continuum of their aging process, whether it's normal aging or whether it's, the impact of multiple conditions that impacts their aging process. They're somewhere on the continuum. Most people have no idea really where they are on the continuum. So what happens is their expectations are based on what they know and only what they know or what they learned on the internet. I've read survey. I mean, you can't even imagine asking people questions about their parents.
Yeah.
Both in the skilled and in the assisted living, did you know your mother was literally had COPD? And they're like, I don't even know what that is. And literally it was a chronic condition that they'd had for decades.
Right. Well, and I think part of the issue with all of this and the aging process is that when you're born and you're from like birth to like age 5, you have developmental milestones where you learn how you learn to speak, you learn how you play. Like there are just certain developmental milestones that you meet in childhood. Then you have adolescence, and then when you get into adulthood, there's so many factors that come into play that the way we age is different. Like we're the most diverse. The older we get, the more diverse we are. And so, you could have two 65-year-olds and one could have COPD and, the other could have diabetes, and it's impacting their health in very different ways, and then if the COPD smoked, a pack of cigarettes a day, like they're going to look physically different than that other person. So I just think it is something that if you've seen one 65-year-old, you've seen one 65-year-old. And, so it is a lot of education, but let's move on now to the last domain, which is emotional and spiritual health, which I think we've kind of touched on.
We did. Yeah, emotional and spiritual health is a domain that is oftentimes overlooked in terms of expectations. And it really is about the importance of spirituality, the importance of religion, the importance of, your value and your belief set on care and on quality of living, quality of dying, and the impact that has on unexpressed feelings and unexpressed needs in this domain really play out near the end of life in ways that are really very traumatic in most instances. So having sort of the tools and the resources to begin to have those conversations early on, they really are, as you know, embedded in so many, particularly in goals of care, are embedded in there. But having real intention around learning more about the impact that religion, or the importance that religion and the value and belief system, particularly because we are caring for such a diverse population all over the planet, understanding that is so critically important and helps so much the feedback we get. Talk about trust building. Like that place is where, we really have a unique opportunity sort of to create this unspoken understanding with each other. If we just ask the questions and we really listen and we seek to understand more than be understood in this area, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to let people know where they can find this white paper. It's called Resident and Family Expectation Management in Senior Living. So where can people find this and connect with you, or what should they do?
Yeah, just, I obviously welcome continued conversation with you, Melissa, and all the amazing work you're doing. To reach us, I've got kind of two places you can go. You can certainly go to my law firm's website, which is www.adelmanfirm.com, and I think you'll be providing that in your informationals. And then go check out the Guide Path website. It's www.guidepathlllc.com. That is where we are developing the body of work and the resources for residents and families, and where you can find this white paper to really learn more, and really using the white paper as a launching off point also with your assisted living communities. Take it with you, talk to them, see what kinds of resources they have available to help speak to these 5 domains. And if they don't, they should call us, because we can really help educate and train and provide the survey and resources around that in the family education series. So that's where we can be found. And just really, really important work you're doing, Melissa. I'm just so grateful to be here. I've learned so much from you, which is really the amazing part of this industry too, is even after almost 35 years, just I learned 20 new things today. I feel like Winnie the Pooh. I appreciate that.
Well, I did too. And I do want to let people know that, we need to help spread the word to assisted living facility, like people that work in this industry. But if you're a family member and you're listening to this today and your loved one is in an assisted living facility, you can just write down this website and take it to that administrator and say, here's a list of resources that can help your staff, so it needs to kind of be a two-way street. And then helping, to definitely be sure to share this podcast with them. And so I just really appreciate you being here today. I love the survey and the results and the messages that you have in here for the industry. I also tend to be very defensive of the long-term care industry, because the people that work in long-term care aren't there for the money. The actual people work in the building, not the owners, not the for-profit, but the actual people are there because they love older adults, they love their families, and they love, and being helpful. So I just appreciate the fact that you guys have done the survey and developed these resources. and the work that you're doing as well. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. Just what a great way to get ready for the weekend. So anyway, thank you so much. And thanks to all your listeners for all the contributions they make to their own families and just taking time to listen.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. You can check out other episodes on this platform or visit my website at melissabphd.com. Thanks to listeners like you, in the first 18 months of This Is Getting Old, we have reached a ranking of top 10% globally, and I cannot tell you how much I appreciate your support in making that happen. I'm also really excited to let you know that you can now work with me directly, either one-on-one or you can join one of the groups that I coach. Particularly if you're an adult child dealing with an aging parent or a caregiver trying to manage the complexities of someone living with Alzheimer's disease. In the show notes, you can also find information about how to reach out and contact me directly, and I hope to work with each of you very soon as we discover and share more ways to make the world more age-friendly for everyone. My website also has information about how to contact me for speaking engagements, or if you have someone you'd like to recommend as a show guest for This Is Getting Old. If you have a product or service in the aging space that you would like to advertise and or sponsor an episode, there's more information about that on my website. And you can also find books and courses that I developed and learn more about the products and services that I recommend. So don't forget, if you like the podcast, the best way to help me grow and support it is to like it, share it, and leave a review in whatever platform that you've tuned in on today. Your likes, shares, and reviews help increase my rating and my rankings, and also help other people find the podcast. I look forward to reading your reviews and hearing from you.